Hey everyone, and welcome to After Hours. Tonight we're going to be taking our first look at the Flamenco by Northcott panel. This is by AIE Rossmann, and this panel has multiple different elements that you can use in your actual quilting. When it first came in, to me it gave me Baltimore album wool applique vibes, and I thought, oh my gosh, we have to do an After Hours about this. Break it down into a couple of different segments, and I want to take you through the planning process of how you're going to quilt this from my eyes. And you could either do it custom quilting, or you could do an edge to edge, whatever you want to do. In this one, we're going to be taking a look at custom quilting the different elements of the panel. So this will be a multi-episode panel. So you're going to kind of see it from a planning process to then a preparation process, what type of batting, what type of thread, stitches per inch, how you're going to load it onto your long arm, and then we're going to actually take it to a multi-part quilting episode. So there's going to be a lot to do with this panel. It is so beautiful. Before we get started, it is available as of filming right now on our website, www.longarmsupplies.net. So hop there and grab one before they're gone. And let's just jump right into this. So the first thing I want to take you through is breaking the panel apart into elements. When you see something for the first time, it can sometimes come off a little overwhelming. I've had that happen to me before even. And I kind of want to take you through how I look at a panel and kind of break it apart into its different design elements. So, first thing that we're looking at right here is this panel has multiple different pieces that can sometimes be a little overwhelming. But if we kind of look at the main focus of it, you have this center medallion. So this has a circle right here that's a little bit of a pretty dark gray to differentiate it from the black negative space. And then you have these orange, yellow, different color petals that overlap one another to give it some dimension. So I would take this center section as your first element, so kind of breaking that apart when you're figuring out how you want to quilt it. Your second element would be looking at the flowers that are arrayed around the outside. And from first glance, there's a lot going on, but if you break it down, you actually have one section. So if I kind of take my finger and draw a line through here, one section around here, just like this. So these three flowers and these three leaves are the same thing all the way around. Because they're different colors, sometimes the eye can get a little overwhelmed by it when you're designing it. So your second element would be breaking it down into just this one piece. If you're going to place the same design in there, then that makes it a lot easier for you. Or if you want to go every other design, or if you want something different in every section, at least you have the base model to work from. Your third element in this panel is going to be the black negative space. Because there is a large amount of gap here, you might not want to leave this blank. You may want to put something in the background, which is what we're going to do. But looking at that as a different element, you can do that as well. So you've got 1, 2, 3. And then your fourth and final element would be the borders / sashings. So you have about 1 1/4 inch sashing here and here, and then about a 3.5 inch, a little over that border here, with these leaves that go counterclockwise around the panel. So when you're breaking that apart and you're figuring out exactly what you want to do, it's really nice to separate those into those sections so you can plan it out a little bit easier for yourself. So what I did doing that, I took 4 different pictures of this section and I printed out those pictures, place them in sheet protectors. You've seen us do that on the channel before. And this one is going to help you sketch it out and figure out exactly what you want to do at that point. So let's go overhead and start that process. So starting in the center of this panel is how I'm going to start designing it. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the order of quilting. We'll get to that in another episode. But the center medallion for this first element is the first thing I want to take a look at. Now, I plan in the preparation episode of doing different batting types in this quilt. So taking that into effect, I don't necessarily want to put a ton of quilting in each of these petal pieces. You definitely can, but one thing you really want to make sure of is that you're being realistic with your quilting. And thinking of looking at a picture, this looks a little larger than the actual thing, so if I come in and I start putting a ton of different quilting in here, that might be really hard to accomplish once it's on the machine itself. So make sure you're pretty realistic with what you're wanting to quilt. Now let's say, for instance, you maybe want to come in with some feathers or anything like that. A big thing to start off with would be doing stitch in the ditch around these petals to make them pop and keep the dimension that they were designed with. Because there's 3 levels of petals, you kind of want to keep that same dimension before you come in with quilting. If I started straight away with, like, say, some feather work here, and that was a jankety feather, but you get the idea, it would pull this piece. Let me get the actual panel so you can see it. Let's grab this. Easier to see on the printed fabric than on a picture. There we go. So if I started with the physical quilting here and started quilting, it would pull these lines away from their natural dimension that you've made. So instead of that little bit of shadowing that you get here, it would pull that and that shadow would stretch and you would lose that illusion of what's going on here. So you definitely want to get in and do some stitch in the ditch first. I would start off with the background and then come into there. So we will take our handy dandy marker and you'll start off with your stitch in the ditch around this section all the way around here as you go. And I would keep this stitching continuously as long as it fits within your throat space. If your throat space doesn't allow this large of a center medallion, then you'll stop and roll the quilt until you can fit everything in. So we're going to go all the way around this, just like that. Now, wherever you stop, if you want to try and continue on and find the path of least resistance, you're more than welcome to do that. Sometimes I like to tie off and then go find another section. So let's say I'm going to we'll start right here for the next piece. So this is broken down again into different pieces and different levels, just like that, as you're working around the section. So you'll be breaking this down into different elements as you're working around to keep the natural flow and the natural order of the way the things look. So we're working all the way around this. And this is just the idea. You'll see it much better when it's on the actual quilt. The color levels on the printer weren't exactly what I wanted. So it's sometimes a little harder to see. But you're getting the idea that you're working around and each one of these lines will have stitch in the ditch around them. Now, if you want to go in after you've done all your stitch in the ditch and then apply another layer of quilting, you definitely can. Let's say you want to go with echoing. You could come in 1/4 of an inch and you could then echo around these pieces if you wanted to. If you want to come in with some feather work, find the direction that you want your feathers to go. You could feather them up as you work. Personally, what I want to do is I just want to do stitch in the ditch on these sections because I'm going to double layer batting for this quilt and I want this section to really pop up since this is the center medallion and this to kind of be the main focal point of what we're doing. In the center here, I will follow the little swirl that's already there. So I'll swirl it in with the quilting, and then I'll swirl it back out, just like that. Now we mentioned the medallion has a circle around it that's a little darker, or excuse me, a little lighter than the negative space in the background. It might be hard to see on camera, but there is that little bit of a lighter section back here. So to really make this centerpiece pop, especially since you're only doing stitch in the ditch for this minus the swirl there in the center, is you could do pebble work here in the background or you could do a micro stipple. You want to do something really, really tight because it's going to push that dark gray section to the back and really pop this out, especially doing 2 layers of batting. So if you want to do some type of pebble work, or if you're not comfortable with pebbles just yet, a really tight micro stipple will also do the job around this. If you do decide to come in with some pebbles, you could definitely do that as well as you're working around this section. The only thing with pebbles, if you're doing them, make sure one of them has every now and then a couple over stitching layers. Gives it a little bit of dimension, and if it takes away from any of the other pebbles that you're not super certain about on how they look. So like for this one, I could do a couple extra layers of stitching, and it just kind of adds, again, different layers to the actual quilt itself. So either pebbles or stippling, whichever one you want to do, and then this one right here would just be following the lines that are already on the panel that are given to us, following the path of least resistance. When we actually get on the machine, it'll be a little easier to follow that one on here. So that's your first element, per se. Your second element is going to be that flower section that arrays around. So this is my next picture that I've got already pulled up. And again, like I said, even though it's different colors, it's the same overall idea. And now that I can draw on something, I'll actually give you the idea of what it is. Right here. There we go. So that's the actual element itself that is then arrayed around into a circle, and it just switches colors. So there's a lot of potential for this section as well. Because I want to keep that natural applique look on this quilt, I will be doing stitch in the ditch around everything, including the leaves, but the leaves I'll add a little extra something in. But I want to keep the petals, their beautiful just look. I just want it to really pop like I'm doing a wool applique quilt, or like a Baltimore album. So starting down here, or wherever you would like to start, I'm going to start right here. You're going to travel up and around the leaf. Even though there's different levels of coloring in the leaf, we're going to leave that alone, but we're just traveling around the outside edges of this section as we're working. I want to do the full outside in its entirety, and then I'll come back and do the inner portions of the flowers. But I want to lock down the top section first, and then I'll come in and do all the other stuff. So I'm going to speed this right along for you. So we're working around this. It's so nice to put these in a sheet protector. That way if you don't like what you're doing, just erase it and try again. You can really kind of plan out that blueprint of your quilting prior to getting on that machine and kind of looking at it and be like, okay, what am I going to do now? So we're working around this whole section. Sing yourself a song. All the way around. Okay. I thought it was almost done, which I am. There we go. Okay. Around that section right there. So that's how that's looking. A little background stitch in the ditch. That green marker is hard to see on that black, but you don't want to see your stitch in the ditch anyway, so I guess I did okay with the marker color. So besides having that outside done, once that is completed, then we want to come in and do the stitch in the ditch around these petals. Now there will be a little bit of overstitching at that point, so finding the path of least resistance on this one will definitely come in your favor. So you can travel up one section, so like up here, back down, this is overstitching, overstitching, up that one, down that one, coming back over the stitching, up that one, down that one, overstitch, up this one, down this one, travel there. I'm actually going to go all the way around this, come up here, and then I'll travel up, down, and then back. This will be more overstitching around this, but it's going to keep this going consistently and continuously. And just take it slow when you're actually doing the physical quilting, and don't stress yourself out about hitting that overstitching line, and I guarantee you'll hit it. If you stress and you're shaking and you're like, I have to go over it, then it's going to look more jagged than it really should. But if you're just like, I got this, I can totally do this, which I have complete faith in you that you can, you'll come down that line and then right back up, and it's gonna look beautiful. Even if it falls a little bit off to the side, don't worry about that, because of the way this panel's giving that dimension with the natural shadowing of the flower. This is a different color, but it gives you the same idea. With the natural shadowing of the color, if your overstitching comes off to the side just a little bit, it's just going to look like extra dimension. It's going to look like extra shadowing. So don't freak yourself out too much. And it's easier said than done, because I still freak myself out sometimes. But just let it naturally flow, and you'll be much happier with the end result. Same thing over here, kind of finding that path of least resistance. You have that outside section here to follow, or the inner outside kind of arc section. So we'll go here, 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 back, around here, and up, and stop. I don't know if I could do that again if I tried. Well, we have another flower to try it on, so we'll go over here. All right, so we started over here. We went this way, around the arc. We came down this section, up to the point, down this section, over, touched it, came back, a little bit of overstitching, dropped down, and went back up, just like that. Ooh, that was fun. Let's do it again. All right, let's do this one right here. It's out of the element, but we get the idea. So we came down, over, back, up, down, bounce over, a little bit of overstitching, come back, and stopped right there. Awesome. Okay, so that's all of that stitch in the ditch, and then remember, having that 2 layers of batting, which we'll get to in the next episode, is really going to have this puff. But figuring out what I want to do then helps me in my preparation stage of what battings I want to choose, what threads I want to choose, and of course we're going to get to that. So that's just a bunch of stitch in the ditch there. I did mention I would do something a little extra in the leaves. Now these leaves, if we come back to the actual panel, let's grab that, have light and dark areas of them, kind of like a log cabin quilt, and they kind of follow a natural order. So depending on which color you want to follow, you just kind of want to stick through that to the same thing. So if you want to stick with the lighter and how it curves up in this section and that way in that section, stick through that consistently with what we're about to do next. So these ones that have these little spikes, I want to put feathers in these leaves, and the one that has this curved line all the way out to the point, I want to do some veins in it to make it look like a actual leaf. And because no leaf is the same, at least in my opinion, then no matter what you do with your vein, you can move it all over the place, and then it'll be okay. So I'm going to follow the light section of this, I think, or do I just want to go with the leaf? See, this is the fun thing about Expo. We'll try it. So I'm going to go this direction with my feather. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I like that, I think. Let's erase it and try a different one, just to be sure. There we go. If I went this way, oh, that's not bad either. I think I like the other one more, because it drapes down with the leaf. Since the leaf drapes down to that left section, the feather then drapes down with it, so it looks like it's more of a hanging leaf down to the side. Oh, I like that, yeah. Okay, that wasn't even an intentional lesson, but we got one. That's cool. So, following the drape of the leaf, let's do that. So, the drape of the leaf for this one, if we were to put it on its side, basically is this way. So, keeping the feather that same direction, draping up, just like that. And then this one's going to have a natural vein, so I want to travel up and down, and then give this different lines and veins in it. Now, if you wanted to put something in the stem of these, you could, or if you could just leave, if you wanted to leave them blank, you can as well. These stems are relatively small, in this section. They're not super big, so putting some quilting in there could be difficult. If you wanted to, you could do, let me do it on a larger scale, but let's do a red marker so you can see it. Can we see that? Yeah, that's nice. Okay. So you could do kind of a natural, like a wood grain thing that makes it look like the leaf or the stem has texture and dimension, or you could just stay with keeping them open, which is what I'm going to do. Okay, looking at the next element would be the background of this, the negative space of this. So this is my third picture, quote unquote. I'm just going to use the same one. I actually want to do some cool cross hatching in the background here with a full line stencil. So I'm going to pounce that down, and then I'm just going to have cross hatching in the background. I think it's going to be about an inch cross hatching in the background. When you get to like parts of the applique or the flower, you're just going to hit it. At this point you would tie off, and then you would jump to the next section, tie on, and go. It's going to be some tying and bearing of threads, but it's going to keep it looking more consistent and more continuous. Now, if you want to do something a little bit easier, you could go in and do micro stippling. It would be a lot of it, but you would have much more freedom, and there'd be no tie on and tie off. It would just be constant machine work moving. So you could come in and do some really tight micro stippling around this black thread. That way it's really not seen at all as you work around that section. You can do all that, and that micro stippling also will allow you to get into tight spaces, so you can come in here, just leave yourself a path out that you're not having to cross over anything, and work your way around. So you could do either a crosshatch method, which is going to give it a little bit of like a lattice work look behind these beautiful puffing applique pieces that they have on here, or you could come in and tie it down with some micro stippling and really push that to the back and kind of separate that section as well. Completely up to you, whatever you want to do, but two really nice options to do that with. Last but not least, we're looking at the borders of this, the borders and the sashings. So in the sashings, what I can do is I'm going to use a stencil, a straight line stencil, and I'm going to give myself some line markings with Pounce powder all the way down this section to give me something to stick within. And you could do E's and L's from the border book. You could do hearts from the border book. You could do all sorts of different sections. So we're going to give us, those are just what the lines will look like, but you could give yourself some E's and L's, a little bit of dimension there, all the way around. If you wanted to do just L's, you could do that as well, which is, I mean, it's pretty. It gives it exactly what it needs. I would caution myself doing something like E's and L's with micro stippling in the background. It might, they might not complement each other the way that we want them to. They might look like they're kind of the same thing. So if you plan on doing micro stippling, E's and L's might not work in your favor, but they could. Erase that away. So it could be E's and L's or straight L's. If you wanted to give yourself a heart in the sashing, you could work with those back and forth as you go, which is what I think we're going to do, because that's really pretty. And it works with the flow of the coloring in the background and with the design in that background. So I think that's actually what we're going to do. Okay, that's cool. And having those straight lines to stay within, that's going to help you make your heart and stay in that correct section and keep your distance right. And then I would do that in this sashing and in this sashing to keep it consistent. Or since you've done those hearts there, if you want to do something a little bit easier here, you could just do those straight loops now that you're away from that micro stippling. If you decide to do micro stippling, you could do those L's right here. Would give it a kind of like a rope look around the section to kind of tie it together and frame it. So that'd be kind of pretty too. Actually, I like that. It's when you sit down here and you start really drawing and playing with it, you're like, oh, maybe that looked better on paper than it did in my head. Normally it looks better in your head than it does on paper. But I kind of like the way that one turned out. So you've got that. This panel also, again, like we talked about, it travels around the leaves in a counterclockwise direction. So I spent a lot of time thinking how I wanted to break this section down, because going inside of every single one of these leaves would be a nightmare, in my opinion, because it's a lot of work. Doing micro stippling or cross hatching just in the background of a 3.5-inch border would be a lot. Doing stitch in the ditch around every single one of those would be a lot. Just throwing options out there. So I found the main flow of this, the main vine through here. So if I work kind of around, you'll find the main travel vine as it goes. And that goes around that section, and then this one goes around this section. So you have your main vein to follow. And once I did that, I said, oh my gosh, I could feather this with like maybe like a light green, like a willow or a celery or something like that. And feather this in the direction that those leaves are going. And it would really pop that section. I'd have a beautiful feather border, and it would save me from having to do background and individual leaves on their own. When you're doing something that wraps around a corner, give yourself a 45-degree line from point to point. So drawing a line right here. That tells you where you can keep yourself up to when you're working around a corner, so you're not getting confused on where things go, and it keeps it nice and consistent when things need to meet back up, especially when you're feathering. So what I mean by that is we found that initial vein, and that's how we're going to start our feather work. So if I started right here, I'm going to feather up to this and back out, and you're feathering right over these leaves. Remember, with the color of thread that we're going to choose, it's going to look beautiful. Going right up here. Now we're starting to get our 45-degree line, so we want to keep these nice and tight around that line. Come out, and then this would wrap around that line. All the way around as we're working. So you would go through that all the way through that section. I like to do one side of the feather first and then come back. That's just how my brain works. So this other piece would go this way around here. 45 going out to that corner, crossing over and going in. Giving yourself that line. I keep those consistent. There we go. Giving yourself that line gives you something a little bit closer to stay within when you're curving around that corner. Making them nice and tight in here to hit that 45-degree line gives it that movement of it's actually turning around something, instead of you not knowing where to stop the feather per se and it kind of exploding into the next section. So that's going to kind of take you through your 4 different elements of this section. Thank you so much for joining me and taking a look at the Flamenco panel by Northcott through my eyes. Different design choices, breaking down the elements, and seeing what you can put in with just your little expo marker and some sheet protectors. I'll see you in the next episode as we take a look at the preparation process going into batting, thread, and loading the panel onto your machine.